This video was commissioned by someone who asked me, have you ever dealt with manipulation in intimate or close relationships? When did you realize it was happening? How do you safeguard yourself against being taken advantage of? And I thought that was such a great question and such a great idea for a video, because manipulation in close relationships is something that comes up time and time again for autistic people. It's not always obvious when it's happening, and it can be very hard to identify and avoid. Now, I'm personally quite lucky, and I think it's nothing more than luck actually, that I haven't had much personal experience with being in these sorts of close relationship, i.e. partners or close family. But it has happened to me with employers, authority figures, and even those I considered good friends. Spoiler alert, they were not. Since I wasn't diagnosed back then, it was much harder for me to understand why these situations kept cropping up, and I often didn't realize when they did, and I just didn't know how to protect myself adequately against it. Here's a friendly content warning. Before we begin, I want to give a content warning because this video will contain discussion of manipulation and emotionally abusive behaviors. If you are personally affected in the issues raised in this video, I have provided some links below to resources which can help. I understand that many of us have had these experiences and really want to be heard and believed and to share, but I would please just ask to avoid trauma dumping in the comments. Trauma dumping is sharing trauma without permission in an inappropriate place and time to someone who may not have the capacity to process it. You know, we're all dealing with some level of our own trauma, but especially for this video, I don't want the comment section to become a triggering place for others. And it's also not the place to seek help, so please check out the links below instead if you're in a crisis. Additionally, whenever there is discussion of abuse or abusive behavior, there seems to be a trend to casually shame cluster B personality types, i.e. people with narcissistic, borderline, antisocial, or histrionic personality disorders. Much like autistic individuals, people with personality disorders can be misinterpreted in social situations, negatively stereotyped, which is perpetuated by TV and movies, of course, treated poorly solely on the basis of their diagnosis, and are often actively working to ameliorate their challenges, just like we are. Using words such as narcissist, bipolar, or crazy to describe abusive or borderline abusive behavior only adds to the stigma of having one of these diagnoses. Labeling people as toxic when in reality they just have a different opinion, perspective, are acting a certain way due to trauma, or you just don't like them, is damaging and dishonest, not to mention kind of manipulative in itself. Roll intro. So let's start at the beginning. What actually is manipulation? It's defined as to control or influence a person or situation cleverly or unscrupulously. This psychological strategy can be described as an emotionally unhealthy way that people who are unable to ask for what they want or need in a direct way express those needs. The aim of manipulation is to control others. It's important to note that the textbook definition highlights a person's specific intent to exploit, control, or influence via dishonesty, unfairness, or lack of morals. This is relevant in the context of autistic people often being accused of manipulation. That's not to say it doesn't or can't happen. However, we'll talk a little bit more later about why it may seem like autistic and neurodivergent people are controlling or manipulating when actually it's not intentional or even realized on their part. There is also a kind of manipulative behavior coded into society that many people end up doing unconsciously. It's sort of a soft manipulation that people, especially neurotypicals, use in everyday life without any issues. They might use forms of manipulation to get ahead at work, in business, or in social situations. And a certain level of manipulation is seen as permissible, especially if the ends justify the means. What many non-autistic people can do, however, is inherently see and understand the boundaries of this practice without overstepping the line. And I believe that line can be hard to identify for autistic people. Who is manipulative? Anyone can act in a manipulative way with or without realizing it. People who habitually manipulate people in their lives are divided into two archetypes, the bully and the victim. Bullies make you feel fearful and may be aggressive, threatening, or intimidating. Victims cause feelings of guilt in their target, usually by acting hurt. But while the manipulator may play the victim, in reality they have caused the problem. People targeted by a victim manipulator often try to help the manipulator in order to stop feeling guilty. They often feel responsible for helping the victim by doing whatever they can to stop the victim's suffering. What does it feel like to be manipulated? Fear, obligation, and guilt are common feelings that result from being manipulated. If you feel scared to do something, or like you have to do it, or guilty about doing or not doing it, it may be manipulation. You may feel like you're being pressured or controlled, or maybe questioning yourself more than usual, especially if you're questioning your own worth, memory, or reality. You may have trouble making decisions, be overly worried about a perceived character flaw, feel confused about your relationship with the person, suddenly find yourself in an argument you didn't intend to have, or feel like you're not making progress, or you're saying the same thing over and over and not being heard. You can feel unclear about your thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. You may always be apologizing or frequently making excuses for the person's behavior. You can't understand why you're not happy, or you know something is wrong, but you don't know what. This is my personal favorite. Another way manipulation might make you feel is as though everything has strings attached, i.e. nothing is given freely, but rather with expectations or consequences. If someone is doing you a favor, but it's not for fun or for free, they could be manipulating you. People who come across as nice, with a capital N, might be helpful and do lots of favors for people, but if they have ulterior motives or expect things in return, this seemingly helpful behavior is actually a negative tactic designed to manipulate. If you don't respond to their help in the way that they want or expect, they may make you out to be ungrateful, selfish, or try to guilt you into doing what they want. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is manipulation that causes the questioning of reality, memory, or thoughts or perceptions. The manipulative person may twist your words, make everything about them, hijack the conversation to turn it on you, or make you feel like you've done something wrong when you're not sure that you have. If you've been gaslit, you may feel a false sense of guilt or defensiveness. Manipulative people typically only blame, they do not take responsibility. Even when it starts out with seemingly small offenses, gaslighting behavior can escalate into something that impacts your daily life and decision-making abilities, and makes you question your own reality constantly. The techniques used to gaslight someone are withholding, the person refuses to listen or says they don't understand. Countering, when the abuser questions the victim's memory of an event. Blocking or diverting, the abuser changes the subject or questions the victim's thinking. Trivializing, making the victim's needs or feelings seem unimportant. And forgetting or denial, the manipulator pretends to have forgotten what actually happens or denies something they had previously agreed to. Exploiting norms. Exploiting the norms and expectations of reciprocity is one of the most common forms of manipulation. This is one reason why autistic people are more vulnerable to this type of treatment. It's easier to manipulate someone who doesn't have a firm understanding of what society considers normal and expected in a given situation. For example, a salesperson may make it seem like they are giving you a deal in order to pressure you to buy their product, or a partner may buy you a gift and then request something in return. These tactics work because they abuse social norms. Neurotypical social norms. Two other common tactics are foot in the door or door in the face techniques. The foot in the door tactic is when someone starts off with a small and reasonable request, such as asking if you have time to help them with something. This leads to a larger request, such as asking to borrow money. The door in the face technique is the opposite. Someone makes a big request, and once that's rejected, they follow up with a smaller request. For example, someone may ask you to drive them somewhere far away, and when you said that you can't, they may ask you to give them money for transport. This tactic works because not only does the second request seem more reasonable after the first request, but is more likely to cause feelings of guilt in the person being manipulated. You may feel bad that you've said no to the person or are unable to help, so that when they give you another smaller way to help, you feel obligated to do so. I just want to point out that both of these tactics are explicitly promoted by society. Ever read a business book? This sort of stuff is constantly presented as the way to get ahead, especially in your career and in business. It's not surprising that it seeps into other areas of our lives. Emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation often involves mind games in order to gain power in relationships with the goal of controlling the other person. A healthy relationship is based on mutual trust, understanding, and respect. This is true for all types of relationships. When a person seeks to exploit these elements in order to benefit themselves in some ways, they are engaging in emotional manipulation. This type of abuse can be subtle and hard to identify, especially in the moment. Recognizing the signs. It's important to remember that being manipulated is not your fault. No one deserves to be treated this way. By learning to recognize the signs, you can put a stop to it and learn to protect your self-esteem and your sanity too. Number 1, they try to maintain control of the surroundings. That is, you always seem to meet on their terms. Maybe you're always traveling to them or meeting them at their favorite place, instead of them offering to meet you in your preferred environment sometimes too. Ensuring that they're always in a place where they feel comfortable puts you at a disadvantage. Number 2, they try to get too close too quickly. They might pretend to share their darkest secrets and vulnerabilities with you in order to make you feel special and encourage you to share your secrets and vulnerabilities with them. But later they'll use this information against you. Number 3, they let or encourage you to speak first. This is another way for them to keep the upper hand. By sharing your thoughts first, it gives them a chance to twist your answers to meet their hidden agenda. Emotional manipulators are skilled at altering reality with lies or misstatements in order to confuse you. They may exaggerate events to make themselves seem more vulnerable or understate their part in a situation in order to gain your sympathy, i.e. play the victim. Number 4, intellectual bullying. This is when the person tries to overwhelm you with statistics, jargon, or facts when you ask a question. They do this in an effort to make themselves appear to be the expert and make you doubt your own knowledge, opinions, or decisions. Bureaucratic bullying happens when the person overwhelms you with paperwork, procedures, or red tape to make it impossible to move forward, for example, the UK government. Number 5, they make you feel guilty for voicing concerns. If you ask questions, scrutinize, or point out errors, or make suggestions, the manipulator may respond in an aggressive manner or try to draw you into an argument. By making you feel guilty for expressing your concerns in the first place, they then use this to control your choices and influence your decisions. There are many other common behaviors of manipulators, such as a manipulator may diminish your problems and successes while playing up their own. They may always be trying to one-up you. Their goal is to invalidate your experiences and force you to focus and exert your emotional energy on them. They can also act like a martyr, so while they may eagerly agree to help with something, later they turn it around and drag their feet or look for ways to avoid their agreement. They may act like it's a huge burden and exploit your emotions to get out of it. If someone says mean or rude things then claims to be just joking, they could be manipulating you. This is designed to sow a seed of doubt in your mind so that it's easier for them to exploit or control you later on. They may also be constantly critical of you, dismissing or degrading you as their way for them to chip away at your self-esteem and make you easier to control. They can also use your insecurities and feelings against you, knowing your weak spots and using them to wound you and make you feel vulnerable and upset. Using your feelings against you to cause you to feel guilty or like your emotions are unreasonable allows them to invalidate you further. Using guilt trips or ultimatums is also common, targeting emotional weaknesses with dramatic statements in order to get you to apologize or agree to what they want. Emotional manipulators never take accountability for their actions and never accept responsibility. They will try to make you feel guilty and responsible for everything, and you may end up apologizing even when they're the ones at fault. They may also pretend to apologize, but it really actually sounds like, "I'm sorry if you felt that way," or "I'm sorry you remember it that way, that really hurts me." The language that they use never actually assumes blame, and instead finds a way to turn it around onto you again. Passive aggression and silent treatments are also common behaviors of manipulative people. They may say or do something and later deny it. When this happens, it's easier for them to blame you for misunderstanding, causing it, or being unreasonable. Sometimes, emotional manipulators will act too calm during arguments or crises. They often have the opposite reaction to the person they're manipulating, especially in emotionally charged situations. This is so that they can use your reaction against you to make you feel too sensitive, to blame, unreasonable, or use it as a way to further tear you down. Why autistic people are sometimes accused of manipulation or being toxic. Now, this is a really tricky but important part because I want to acknowledge that autistic people can and do abuse others. However, I would argue that it is more common that our behavior is misinterpreted by others than genuinely intended to manipulate. And this is something that I really struggled with while writing this script, part of the reason it's taken me over a year to finish. Because I saw a lot of behaviors that I myself had done in the past, but for different reasons. Non-manipulative reasons, autistic reasons. And it's not happened a lot, but it's happened enough that being accused of manipulating on purpose, being toxic, being a terrible person, has really hurt me and really done damage to the way that I see myself, and has made me dwell on the past way more than I should have. But this is difficult because you can't get inside people's heads, so all we have to go by is their behavior. And you like to think that if people know you, they'll understand your reasons for acting in certain ways, but that doesn't always happen, even with people you think are close to you. For example, there is a difference between oversharing to gain control versus autistic oversharing. That's not to say autistic oversharing is always appropriate. Habitual oversharing can be trampling other people's boundaries, personal rants and attacks on social media, without filter or regard for who sees the daily drama, sharing personal details with strangers and acquaintances, long one-sided conversations, or expecting on-call emotional therapy from new friends or strangers or YouTubers. But the reasons behind these behaviors are not always manipulative, and that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. Sometimes autistic people relate to other people in a conversation by recalling an anecdote where something similar happened to them. It's a very common form of autistic conversation. And this is actually how a lot of autistic conversations go when we are talking to other autistic people. We kind of take it in turns to share anecdotes. And it works, I think, a lot of the time with us. Not always, but most of the time. But when a non-autistic person is part of that conversation, it might seem like the autistic person is purposefully recentering a conversation on themselves, or trying to one-up the other person, when really we're just trying to show you that we understand how you're feeling because this same thing happened to us that one time. And that's also how our long-term memory works in a lot of cases. It's associative rather than linear. That's another video for sure. And that's not the only way that autistic behavior can be misinterpreted. Not responding in an emotional way, like I said before, staying too calm in a crisis, may in fact be autistic shutdown or overload, or maybe to do with the ADHD trait of being good in a crisis. Silent treatment may be situational mutism, that is the inability to talk in certain stressful or highly emotionally charged situations. Passive aggression may be an attempt at humor or completely unintentional. Rude things may be autistic bluntness or lack of socializing experience or understanding. Ultimatums can just be boundaries for autistic people who may have more rigid routines and needs than other people, and maybe don't express those boundaries in a neurotypical way, so it might seem like an ultimatum. Seeming to draw people into arguments or intellectual bullying can actually be info dumping or needing to correct misinformation or clarifying what someone has said. Only meeting on your terms in order to manipulate you could actually be the need to remain in safe spaces. Getting too close too quickly can be autistic oversharing and not understanding the social rules of how relationships progress. Autistic people can be misinterpreted so easily, and our behaviors and words taken in ways that may make someone think that we are being manipulative. Manipulators often have poor boundaries, either too rigid or too enmeshed. Autistic people often have poor boundaries too. Why autistics are more vulnerable to being manipulated? There are several autistic traits which make us more vulnerable to manipulative strategies. Honesty, being more trusting, being guileless, that's a word I'm not sure I've ever said out loud before. The inability to predict others' motives or consequences. Personally, I've been caught out by my stream of consciousness talking style, answering direct questions with honest answers without stopping to think, why are they asking me this? My general belief that no one would have a reason to manipulate me, and consequences of masking before I knew I was autistic and before I knew about masking. I talked a little bit more about that specific point in an older video, which I'll put a card up here, and I'll link in the description box down below. And manipulators may be drawn to this. They may be drawn to us because, let's face it, we are kind of easy targets. We want to be accepted and liked, not isolated. We often don't understand why someone would lie about something. Autistic people can be over-empathetic and too forgiving without strong boundaries. Additionally, research done at the University of Kent has suggested that those with an autism diagnosis have significantly diminished lie detection abilities. But also, within the general population, the more autistic traits someone has, the poorer they were at detecting lies. And they say in the study they might consider training autistic people to be better lie detectors or something. But honestly, everything I've read about lying, detecting lying through body language, all these indicators are also autistic traits, like not making eye contact or whatever, or dodgy body language. So that's not really helpful to autistic people who may have all those behaviors to start with, and you think, well, how on earth can you tell the difference? Is there actually a real science to this body language thing? Because I'd like to know the answer to that. Unintentional autistic gaslighting. In addition to intentional manipulation, autistic people are also vulnerable to being gaslit unintentionally, usually by non-autistic people who don't necessarily wish us harm and are sometimes actually trying to help. While it's not exactly manipulation, I wanted to include it because it does make us question our own experiences, perceptions, and reality, and because it comes from everywhere, especially when you're younger, and makes you very hard to trust your own reality sometimes. Let me give you some examples. It's too loud. No, it's not. That hurt me. No, it didn't. Stop being so sensitive. It's all in your head. The bus is late. So what? Why are you making such a big deal out of it? No one else is bothered. Just pick up the phone and call them. Stop being so lazy. No, you can't hear the electricity. Stop being dramatic. If the people around you don't understand autism, this sort of gaslighting can happen on a daily basis, and I believe it is what eventually leads to alexithymia, or the inability to recognize your own emotions. Because we've been told over and over again that our perception of our own emotions and our own reality is not legitimate, is wrong, and that we're overreacting. So eventually we lose touch with our own emotional states. Safeguarding, boundaries. So this has all been very heavy, for me also, by the way, and you might think, well, what can we actually do about this? Are we doomed to be manipulated forevermore? Well, I don't think so, and I think that learning about setting and keeping boundaries is a very effective tool for everyone to develop, but especially the neurodivergent. Boundaries give us agency over our physical space, body, and feelings, and communicate our limits. Boundaries can and should be set for personal space, sexuality, emotions and thoughts, possessions, time and energy, and culture, religion, and ethics. The benefits of having good boundaries are improved self-esteem, conserving emotional energy, and having more independence. It may seem like setting boundaries will keep you isolated from people, but actually they improve relationships and keep people safe. Relationships with boundaries are safe spaces for people to become closer, and they can be flexible, and it's good to reassess them occasionally. Once you start setting boundaries for yourself, it becomes easier to see and accept other people's boundaries. If you have no personal boundaries and you give everything of yourself all the time, you may think, why can't they give me that when I do it? Self-esteem and self-identity are impacted when boundaries are not put in place or adhered to, and they can cause resentment towards others because of your inability to advocate for yourself. How we define our boundaries depends on what our rights are, how we feel, and what our values are. Basic rights include the right to say no without feeling guilty, to be treated with respect, making your needs as important as others, accepting of your own mistakes and failures, the right not to meet others' unreasonable expectations of yourself. How can you determine if someone is crossing a boundary with you? Now, this can be really hard if you have alexithymia, but if their words or actions make you feel anxious, if your heart rate increases, you are sweating, or you have a tightness in your chest, or feel sick or confused, that tells you where to draw the line. Try to identify your top 3 most important values, and then think about how much a specific person challenges, steps over, or prods those values in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable. There are a few different types of boundary violations. Verbal, not being allowed to speak, yelling at you, saying derogatory or inflammatory things, gossiping about you. Psychological and emotional, preying on self-esteem and sense of self, using confidential information against you, lying, criticizing, demeaning, judging, or manipulating, making fun of you, your thoughts, feelings, or beliefs, trying to make you feel guilty, making demands of time or energy, shaming or embarrassing you, bullying, or saying their thoughts and beliefs are more important than yours. And that's pretty much what we've been talking about in this video. And physical, moving into personal space, touching you, being inappropriate or too familiar, especially sexually, touching your things, violating your privacy, such as your mobile phone or computer, damaging or destroying your property, or threatening you with physical harm. Ethical, spiritual, and moral boundary violations exist as well, but it's probably too many to list right now. But essentially, you have to take responsibility for yourself, develop healthy self-respect, heed warning signs, don't try to fix people, remember that you are in control of your own choices, and know yourself. Setting boundaries requires you to be assertive. Being firm and kind is best. Assertive language and behavior is clear and non-negotiable, but not aggressive, threatening, or blaming others. Using I statements can help communicate your feelings and boundaries in an assertive way. For example, I feel blank when blank happens because reason. What I need is boundary. Remember that no is a complete sentence. Safeguarding your spaces and possessions could include locks on doors or drawers, passcodes on devices, using a do not disturb feature on your phone, messaging apps, or deleting your social media apps, scheduling alone time and making people aware that you will not be available during that time. Delaying a response to a request, i.e. sleeping on it, can help protect from manipulation because it gives you a chance to process what's just happened and react according to your values rather than the pressure of the situation. There's also a nice exercise you can do called the bullseye approach, which you could ask to do with your therapist, coach, or someone like that, or by yourself, I guess. You basically decide which ring the people in your life fit into, and from there you can establish how do you treat them, how should they treat you. How do you know if someone has moved up or down a ring? And that's something I struggle with, is the transition from acquaintances into friends, because to me it's a very blurry and unclear line. How to get out of manipulative relationships. At this point, you might well have identified a relationship or friendship that you have where you think you might be being manipulated. Now, I don't want to give specific advice here. Once again, please take a look at the links below if you're in this situation, especially if you're trapped in an abusive relationship. Situations can easily escalate and, of course, become very dangerous. So this is more general advice for dealing with these sorts of relationships. It's good to hear some counterpoints and get perspective. Abusers normalize their behavior to their victim until the victim believes that this behavior is normal and acceptable. People generally need help to break out of the assumption that these interactions are normal. Find trusted, impartial people and ask them, is this normal? Is this behavior okay? If necessary, apologize for your part and then move on. You might not get an apology back, but you shouldn't dwell on that. Don't try to beat them or show them facts because they don't care. When manipulators realize they're losing control, their tactics may grow more desperate. There may come a point where you might consider cutting them out of your life completely, which is more of a last resort. If you can't do that because, for example, they are family members that you rely on, learning techniques to manage the behavior can help. Speaking to a therapist may also help you make sense of the situation and find ways to handle it. In fraught situations, observe their emotions, but don't absorb them. We aren't responsible for anyone else's feelings. If you think you are being gaslit, you can write down specifics from a conversation to look back on in future. Give yourself permission to feel what you feel, get a second opinion, and most of all, have compassion for yourself. This is not an easy topic to understand, apply to our relationships, or even think about in terms of our own behaviors and choices. There is an element of manipulation in many social interactions, and for most people now and again. What we need to learn to identify is the point at which it becomes unacceptable or causes us harm, and that can be difficult for anyone and downright impossible for autistic people. It's been a heavy video. Go get a drink of water or a soothing cup of tea. Don't forget to check out the links below if you need more support. Please don't trauma dump in the comments, and I'll see you next time for probably a more cheery video. Bye. And it's definitely not the place to seek help, so please check out the links below. Indeed. Indeed, what? Sometimes emotional manipulators will act too calm. Sometimes emotional manipulations, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes emotional manipulation, but also within the general population, the more autistic traits that someone, not an autistic person, but just self-esteem and self-identity, don't try to beat them up or try to beat them up. No, please don't beat them up.